Aries. Okay. I'm just shuffling a little bit, Aries. Most helpful message for Aries at this time. Most helpful message for Aries at this time. You got energy vampire. Give us more. So do you know what an energy vampire is? An energy vampire is just the energy dynamic that can happen when you or someone else doesn't know that they are their own source, that they are a sovereign being responsible and capable of giving themselves what they need. And sometimes an unfair relating dynamic will emerge out of a misunderstanding or false belief that we need something outside of ourselves to be complete and whole, whether it just be recognition, love, kindness, assistance, whatever it may be. Now, I'm not saying that it is inappropriate to ask for help when you need it, but we should always be looking to help ourselves before we default to asking somebody else outside of ourselves for help. If every single act we have in life depends on someone else to value us, to notice us, to recognize us, to give us praise, to give away their power to us, this is called energy vampirism. So you can be that in some scenarios and not in others. That's like you could have a very independent person who relies on themselves for most things, except for they manipulate women, for instance, and they pretend to lure a woman in with what's called a love bomb, expressing great amounts of care and love, only to get them hooked on. And when the woman is fully interested and invested in the relationship, they drop it off and they only give breadcrumbs. And what this causes is an imbalanced energy exchange where a woman may be then looking to the energy vampire for more. And then they become vampires on each other. When it's kind of silly once you understand the dynamic, because if you look at it from afar, you can see that both are thinking that they're lacking and trying to get from each other. Neither one is fulfilled, because the only way you can be fulfilled is to fulfill yourself. So both parties' energy could be refocused onto themselves to solve the entire issue. But you'd have to value yourself. So maybe it's a different scenario. Maybe it's an obligation you might have to a child, right? If you gave birth to a child and they are refusing to take responsibility for themselves, and maybe like putting themselves in dangerous situations that you always have to rescue them from, and doing this repeatedly, if this is a long-standing pattern of many years, and this could be an energy vampire situation. Now, I'm not saying that you should never help your child. Personally, I wouldn't give up on any of my children, even if they're in energy vampirism. But being aware of it allows me to be very discerning on when I am enabling the situation and when I am giving from my overflow. Right? I can be respectful and helpful to somebody without draining myself. That's a very important thing to discern. So what else do we have? Saturn. So Saturn suggests that this is restricting you in some way, or it feels like a karmic pattern. It feels like something that you're stuck in, restricted by, that you have a responsibility for. That's why that example of having the child came up, because a child is someone that you have responsibility for. So it feels like something that you're completely stuck in, and that it's a lot of work to get out of or to balance the energy around. So let's see what else. It has to do with how you're specifically relating to other people. Okay, so one thing I realized is When I first became aware of the idea of narcissism, I had not been aware that there were some people that operated without considering emotions of themselves or others. I had no idea, and this made me susceptible to being in relationship with someone who I expected to be operating with regard to emotions, but wasn't. So their relating with me was all strategic and logical for their own means. They had their own agenda, right? Now, when I first realized that, I felt like a victim to that. I said, wow, that's so awful that some people do that to others. I can't believe that that happened to me. Like, I don't want to participate in that. But I felt myself still drawn and still wanting to hold the person in the highest light, still expecting them to be able to learn how to do it better, how to do it more fair, how to be in a relationship with me on a fair basis. But continuously I was disappointed because that was just a fantasy. And one thing that can happen to enable these type situations is a fantasy world is created, or rose-colored glasses are used in order to continue in the pattern. And what those fantasy worlds do, or rose-colored glasses do, is keep you from looking within and being sovereign. So what I eventually had to realize was it was in my relating dynamic that I allowed that to happen, because I wasn't taking full responsibility for my own needs, my own worth, for knowing my worth, for knowing my value, and for realizing that if I'm in a relating dynamic with somebody else who continuously makes it an unfair dynamic and continuously gives me an unpleasant experience, and I continue to do that, then I am the one who's subjecting myself to an unloving situation. I'm the one, because I would be the only one who would know that I don't like that feeling, and I would be the only one who would know that I could stop that feeling. And if I was compelled to keep continuing in that pattern despite me not liking it, then I have to look at, why am I sabotaging myself? Why don't I think I'm worth that? Why am I being mean to myself and unloving to myself? And sometimes these patterns come from our misunderstandings or our interpretation of how our parents parented us. Maybe our parents were too busy to give us the one-on-one attention, or maybe their emotions were never caretaked, so they're not able to caretake ours. So we grow up to a point where we realize, wow, we have this situation where we've not been caretaking our own emotions. And now we're faced with the realization that we have to reparent ourselves in order to be able to relate in a new, fair, balanced way. Now, incidentally, I know a lot about this because I lived this. This is one of the things that I studied here on Earth, right, in this incarnation. And I have developed a fair relating reflection deck. So it's an oracle deck that can help with the transition of relating in that old, imbalanced power struggle relating paradigm to transitioning to a more balanced way of relating that takes your power back, that doesn't rely on others, and doesn't allow energy vampirism, depression, anxiety due to unfair relating. I'm just going to stop and take a sip of water. So if this fair relating reflection deck sounds interesting to you, then feel free to go to my website. It's juliemandytuller.life. Mandy just has an I. Julie Mandy with an I, Tuller, TULLAR.life. And I'm sure it's linked in the description here anyway, but you can buy my Fair Relating Reflection deck. It's a handmade deck, so it's encoded with the wisdom that I have gained, and is a great help to me at times where I was trying to transition, and I don't use it as much anymore, but I would certainly turn to it if I felt confused or unclear on what my next step or the highest path would be for me to take in a certain relating dynamic that I was in. So this tension that you feel that keeps coming up, maybe it keeps blowing up, or maybe it's just like this underlying feeling of not being able to trust, right? Because if someone's sucking your energy, it doesn't feel good, but you might not even be able to pin down why, because it's also looks really normal to you, right? So this is a very subtle feeling, and it's kind of bringing it to your attention now so that you could address it and look into it deeper and reflect on these things that I'm talking about with these energies that are present. Yeah. If you feel something's off with a situation, it's asking you, it's saying that you did understand that correctly, right? It's asking you to pay attention to that. This is also saying if you had to set boundaries in a situation where you understood it was unfair, that was very appropriate. And what you've learned helps you be a guide to others. You may feel a responsibility to do so. You may see this going on all around you and really feel pressure to share. But just know that you just have to be an example, and when somebody asks you to guide them, that's when you guide them, right? Hecate was a guide down to the underworld for Persephone, I believe. And so she can serve. This energy says that you could serve as a guide when you're asked, because you're equipped to walk in this dark place. This is a very dark place when you first wake up to narcissism and energy vampirism. It's like, whoa, like when I described it earlier, I was saying I first blamed the other person, right? First I played the victim to it because I didn't see the biggest picture view at first. But that was okay, right? It's certainly fine to open your eyes in increments to the situation. It's a big thing to realize. And then when you start seeing it everywhere, you can see it in society, you can see it in the culture. It feels like it's normalized in a lot of ways, and even in certain industries it is present. So this is suggesting that there may be a need to revisit a certain situation and get the goodness from it, get what's worth celebrating about it out of it, right? It's like you learned something very valuable, you survived that was quite an adventure that you went through. Certainly while you were in it, it didn't feel good. Certainly while you were in it, it activated a very huge pain body. But once you've understood the dynamic, now there is a need to actually come back and get all the gold from the situation. So it's like, when I now look back at those situations that I was in, I am so thankful because I can see the difference of who I am now and who I was then. So if people didn't kind of show me that weakness that I had in me, my willingness to be an energy vampire or to be energy vampired, then I wouldn't have addressed those issues within myself. I wouldn't have gone into the dark places of myself and shown a light there and healed. And that was a very important part of my process and my experience on Earth, because I found out who I really am. I found out what's really important to me. I found out what skills I really have, how brave I am, how much I really do love myself. So when I look back at those situations, I would not trade them. I don't feel like I was victimized. I feel like this was a soul who agreed to come and show me my weaknesses. I want to know about my weaknesses, especially if I don't know what they are. I need to know what my weaknesses are so that I can be discerning. Otherwise, I would just stay in that state of disempowerment. And let's face it, when you're in that state of disempowerment, it doesn't feel good. You feel like something's off. You don't feel comfortable. You feel like you're always having to look over your shoulder or be the sleuth or figure out why this person is not showing up how they say they're going to show up. And why do you keep wanting to believe them anyway? So revisit it for the gold, meaning the good stuff that you have to celebrate, and how far you've come out of that situation. What you learned about how you relate to other people is really important. And this will help you balance the scales and come into 0 point on the issue. So this basically awoken you to the need to love yourself as your responsibility. You are responsible for loving yourself, and you know that now. You know that you can't just leave that up to somebody else who might be pretending that they want to, right? Because if the only love that you depend on in life is that of somebody else, and they walk away, where do you leave yourself? Not in a very good situation. So these scales need to be balanced out so you can escape this once and for all. It might linger in your energy, and you might still see a lot of that around you, only because you haven't gotten the gold out of it, meaning you haven't realized the good stuff that you got out of that situation, which you may only see as bad right now, you know? Because so what you're doing is balancing it out and realizing as much so-called good there was bad, and as much bad, so-called bad, there was good. It was like you got a lot out of that situation. You know that you are capable of unconditional love, right? Because if you could love somebody who was doing some awful things to you, and in some cases, that it shows a strength that you have, that something that lives inside of you is love, and that you are able to maintain your access to that love in very extreme and uncomfortable situations. That's a beautiful thing. So Aries, this is just asking you to revisit the situation that you've been in when you understood this narcissistic relating dynamic. Celebrate how far you've come, and look for the ways that you can appreciate why that happened, so that you can completely come into balance on that experience and step above it and out of it. Wow, so beautiful. Okay, that completes your reading.